Normally, it is not my policy to talk about those political issues which are current and of which no conclusion has so far occurred, and scenario can change very quickly. But the political crisis in Pakistan, if you can call it a crisis, deserves some podcast so as to understand whether what is the nature of the crisis. There are many opinions about it. Certain people feel that it is a true political crisis where there are political parties which have got very differing interests based on their ethnic and their provincial composition and leadership. Then there are those who feel that it is a true economic crisis in which there is a great problem in balance of payments, even though the Pakistanis send about almost 30 billion US dollars home to their relatives, and Pakistan has an export which is already touching about 30 billion US dollars. So there should not be any free fall of the local currency or something like that, but it is obviously more complex than that. Then there is a general opinion that it is a crisis of confidence in the state, and especially the government. Now, that sounds, this third possibility sounds very true on the face, because the very antagonistic clash between the PDM, the so-called alliance, as well as Mr. Imran Khan, the so-called PTI, whereby mostly the PDM is led by Sindhis and Punjabis, who constitute about 75% of the population of Pakistan. And the PTI is mostly Pashtun-led, although it has got a strong showing in Punjab as well. Some regard it as the crisis of foreign policy, which has its root with the Punjabi versus the Pathan traditional outlook, or you can say it has got its root in the power struggle between China and the USA, or you can say that it has got a root in the traditional policies of Shias and Sunnis of Pakistan, where Sunnis are about 85 to 90% of the population. But Shias, they have got more control over the media and certain types of services. Then, there are people who say it has to do with the KPK situation, where the insurgency of the Waziris and some of those so-called Pakistani Taliban versus the government of Pakistan is raising its head. And the situation across the border has not really helped, where the Taliban, their fellow Afghan Taliban, have taken over. My own view is that yes, there is a true economic crisis, but this crisis is also somewhat artificial. Pakistan can always impose tariffs on imports, a large part of which come from China, so as to reduce the deficit. Pakistan can also impose very strong border regulations so that smuggling of these goods do not come in. And Pakistan can also create strong border control against smuggling and narcotics and things like that across the Punjab, KPK and Sindh, Balochistan border instead of the Afghan border. Uh, so when it comes to the element of foreign exchange issue, yes, there is a genuine issue, and the genuine part of the issue is the increasing prices of the oils, whether these are the crude oil, whether these are the vegetable oils, and so on. But the real problem is, in my view, is that the civil service and bureaucracy of Pakistan, whether civil or military, is overmanned by, let's say, about 25 to 30%. And these huge salary issues and maintenance issues, they are a big problem. It is often said that Pakistan does not have very strong taxation system, and lots of people are out of it. And this is partly correct only in the sense that as far as the direct taxes are concerned, the agriculture seems to be not paying sufficient taxes, and of course sufficient taxes do not come from the tribal type areas and the KPK and the Balochistan, where significant commerce occurs. But generally speaking, it can be said that as far as the direct taxation is concerned, it is only the urban Punjabis and the urban Sindhis which bear the burden of the taxation, which means that there can be some expansion in taxation, at least about 30%, if Pakistan really wants. And then there is the problem. One of the fundamental problems which Pakistan is facing is that Pakistan has lost the support of some of its key funders. And why have they lost this support? There are many reasons for this loss of support. One is that prior to 1971, in which Iran, a neighboring country, had Shah, who was basically on the same side as the West was, and so was Pakistan. So there was less issue, even though Pakistan is mostly Sunni and that is mostly Shia. And another point was that at that time, Pakistan's leadership was in the hands of a lobby which you might call the Khan Shia Qadiani axis, or where the Pathans and the Shias, they had good control over the country, and things were okay. But after 1979, the problem occurred that initially it seems to appear that France and Russia, which was then USSR, probably helped these groups to overthrow the Shah. Although later on, I think the French were disappointed because the mullahs they kept preference for the USSR, but they somewhat distanced themselves from those who were close to France, and so on. The relevance of this thing is because what actually happened was that after the takeover of these Shiite clerics in Iran, the Arabs were looking to Pakistan to play a much more role, because Pakistan had a relatively well-established, well-tried army. Pakistan, the problem was that they thought that because Pakistan is 90% or 85% Sunni, Pakistani planners would have no problem in siding with the Arabs. To some extent, and to not much extent, this did occur. But it could not go on for that long because Pakistan did not want trouble between its minorities and majorities within Pakistan. And this was first demonstrated in Iran-Iraq war, when we obviously did not, and I think should not have taken sides. But when it came to later stages, for example, at the beginning of the Yemen issue, there was a lobby, probably Saud al-Faisal, who wanted Pakistan and Turkey to put some troops in the border and take interest in the thing and try to help solve the issue. At that time, Pakistan, although they passed resolutions supporting Arabia, but they really did not do that. And later on in the Imran government, there were some statements that we will try to mediate between the two. And even that did not occur because Pakistan could not, or was not such a big thing in international arena. It could carry out that because another thing was that it had got no leverage over the Iranians. So ultimately what happened was, then when the Yemen war became too much troublesome and the rockets were landing in Arabia and so on. So when the Ukraine war started, obviously Middle Eastern oil and support was important. So it appears that Russia exerted pressure on Iran, and Iran was already tired of sanctions imposed by the Trump regime, and they felt that there should be some cessation of the hostilities, and probably this is one of the reasons that President Biden did not receive much usually expected welcome apart from the Khashoggi issue. Another problem which is worrying Pakistan and which is creating problem is this China-US tension. Because if you look at the geography, you find out that most of the ports of China, they will be quickly encircled in any Taiwan war, and exports would be quite difficult for China. Chinese would obviously like to use ports like Gwadar, where the Iranians are there to help them, with which they have the alliance. They might even like to cross the border and create the direct corridor with Gwadar, of whose control they already have. Obviously, such a scenario, if there is any military units entering, that will cause problem, and the Taliban, who have got no money, might be in Afghanistan, might help them. Obviously, this has the potential of creating Islamabad, which is not very far off from this type of corridor, a puppet type of situation. Then, of course, the Indian annexation of Kashmir is a great blow to the foreign policy of Pakistan, because some people, even conspiracy theorists, they say that the way the Chinese have tried to colonize part and with the Han Chinese of the Muslim China area of Xinjiang, the same policy has been followed by that, and Mr. Modi has met Mr. Jinping many times. This is also some consideration, which is one of the root causes of instability, and it appears that there might be some policy planners who might be thinking that, okay, let's please both USA and China, and let's put the so-called pro-American PDM in the government, and let the other chap, Imran Khan, who is playing the anti-American card, let them just roam around and give him a presidency, which they have done, and the government in KPK, though taking away from him the chief ministership of Punjab, which is important, and give it to somebody like Mr. Pervez, who is close to some of the, who has got good understanding with some of the Sikhs across the border in case something goes wrong. Now, that type of speculation in a tightly controlled country like Pakistan, which, according to Mrs. Clinton, is a state which is run by the deep state. And then there is the MBS approach, the Mohammed bin Salman approach, which is a different type of approach to the older Arab leadership with which Pakistan had an alliance. Now, this is a leadership which just looks at the money part of it. For example, if India has got buys more oil, then why not have India as an ally? Why Pakistan? If Israel can take care of Iran much better than Pakistan, why not encourage Israel to do the job and keep Pakistan also on the sideline in case the Israelis they start playing any double game. Then there is the in the Middle East, because these things are all interrelated, is a Turkish approach. There is Mr. Erdogan, who's on one hand wants to be the energy pumping station of between Central Asia, Russia, and the Europe, and earn from that. And the other hand, he has been given quite a unwelcome plus welcome stance in recent summit of Putin and Khamenei and Erdogan. And Erdogan seems not to be very happy in not being encouraged or even politely dealt with on his plan to extend some control in bordering Syria to help the refugee issues and the influx into Turkey issue. Generally speaking, in Pakistan, one thing is very important to understand, which is a great worry among certain people, is that if you look at the history of the Mughal Empire, which was a Muslim-dominated, Central Asian-dominated, Persian-dominated empire in the subcontinent, although it is true that the first slap was received from the Marathas, but they had tolerated that. And the real thing which really finished the Mughal Empire was the Iranian invasion of Nadir Shah, who stole a lot of money and tortured people, and you might say that he removed the bank of the Mughals as far as he could. And at that time. And again, one of his commanders from Afghanistan, who came numerous times, Mr. Abdali, he had an attitude of a Ghazi, plus a plunderer, and coming again and again and torturing people and damaging Mughal Empire. And the fact of the matter is that it was the final blow was basically not just the British. The final blow was the Pathans and the Persians who blew the Mughal Empire, and the English, they just completed the job. However, there is some simile, because what is happening in the last 20 years is that Pakistan had already difficulties because of very big India on the border, and Pakistan being a small country, a small economy, had great difficulty in countering that. And with that, the last 20 years of insurgency on the Afghan border is playing the same, trying to play the same role as the Abdalis did to the Mughals, to bring the Muslim Pakistan down. Muslim Pakistan is, you might call, the successor of the Muslim rule in India. And then there are certain other issues. For example, issues of misperception. For example, United States somehow thinks that India can be a great help to it in the struggle against China, which is not actually correct, because the Chinese ports, and China is an export power mainly, and the Chinese ports are more surrounded by Indonesia and Philippines and these countries rather than India. India is far placed. This the American policy platters don't seem to understand, that Indonesia is more important. But the Chinese understand it better. The Chinese delegations, Chinese investment in Indonesia, the Putin contact with Indonesia, they seem to understand the geopolitics better. Whereas the Indian influence in USA seems to tilt the Americans into false belief that somehow India is more important in containing China than, say, Indonesia is. Although they do understand the value of Japan. And Japan is not at the moment in much mood of war, but it is increasing its defense expenditure because it is seeing the aggressiveness of China, especially of the Jinping regime. Some people say that Pakistan would break up in this, but that's not very likely because the provinces of Pakistan are quite integrated. For example, the prosperity of Karachi and part of Sindh depends upon the market of Punjab. The Punjab's prosperity depends upon the waters coming from the Kashmir, and the prosperity of KPK and the Pathans, it depends on the trade with Sindh and Punjab, because their areas are not that good from agriculture point of view. And so people of Pakistan know that independence of each of the provinces is not really that good, and the Balochi people who don't really have a good leadership of theirs, and in media and everything, their coverage is mostly controlled by the Pashtuns, they do understand that if there is not a strong Pakistan, they might be conquered by some Afghan forces, some Iranians will move in, some Western powers might come in, and so on. So they also understand that they are best off in a united Pakistan. So it comes I come to the final point that the current crisis in Pakistan is neither a true political crisis